Hello, good afternoon. I'm Michelle Cheong, who is a global lead of Rating Express product development. I'm joined by Jian Huang, who is the head of product in China. Today, we'll be covering evolving credit risk insights from data and workflow enhancements. We plan to cover the following: emerging trends on the use of data for credit risk analysis in China and across the globe. Secondly, if you have content on your platforms, does databasing matter? We then go through 2 ways to gain insights on credit ratings data and content, such as combining financial statement data and S&P Global's ratings criteria by scores and factors, and also an example. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Michelle Cheong, who is a global lead of Rating Express product development. I'm joined by Jian Huang, who is the head of product in China. Today, we'll be covering evolving credit risk insights from data and workflow enhancements. We plan to cover the following: emerging trends on the use of data for credit risk analysis in China and across the globe. Secondly, if you have content on your platforms, does databasing matter? We then go through 2 ways to gain insights on credit ratings data and content, such as combining financial statement data and S&P Global's ratings criteria by scores and factors, and also an example on text analysis in S&P Global Ratings research, as well as transcripts and news and the roles each one plays. Across the globe, market participants have fed back to us that COVID-19 has become a catalyst in using credit risk data globally. In addition to the need for risk management and surveillance, we observe the following trends. A, rapid automation and the use of data globally, especially in the larger players. Now, whilst there's a lot of talk about bots replacing humans, what eventually happened is that automated processes supplemented, but didn't fully displace the use of web-based platforms, which are still used to take a closer look at entities and develop visualizations. Work from home arrangements post-COVID-19 increased the demand for log-in-free or human intervention-free means of obtaining data and analytics. Some of our clients now really see the use of in-house built API to supplement platform web interface as ways to improve business continuity and continue running these processes when some employees are no longer able to work. In the job market, we are seeing an increased hiring of data scientists, over and beyond just quants in investment management, playing the following roles. The ones highlighted in red are new processes, and the ones highlighted in black in this slide are just been there before COVID. The first one is increasing efficiency and streamlining processes, stress testing and scenario analysis, especially with macroeconomic instability, early warning indicators, tracking sector and industry trends within and outside geographic regions of companies, screening and filtering, and in general, bulk processing of information, and also developing sentiment indices using unstructured data. Last but not least, building proprietary decision-making criteria to reduce amount of human work. How is China, which is at the forefront in the adoption of technology and automation, using credit risk data? We now turn over to Jian, who heads up the product in China.
Thank you, Michelle. We would like to highlight the trend on the use of credit risk data we are observing from the China marketplace. One key trend is the increased utilization of alternative data in credit modeling and surveillance. While traditional data like company financial are still the cornerstone while building and driving the fundamentally based credit analytical model, alternative data like payment data, sentiment data derived from earnings transcript, company announcement, news and social media has been gaining traction in the credit modeling space, as well as for ongoing credit surveillance. One related trend is that as the volume of the data increase, coupled with the adoption of mostly unstructured data, data science and data analytical tool has been taking the center stage of maneuvering, analyzing, and to be used to generate insight. With regards to the conventional data, especially the company financials, we see continued demand on analytical and insight around accounting fraud detections. Currently, there is no consensus around how to systematically detect those potential accounting manipulations, so that remain a developing area. Overall, with the ever-increasing number of new data sets, it is becoming more and more important to have a robust process for data asset governance and management. This will involve cleaning, standardizing of the newly introduced data set, linking of the relevant data set, including the new one and the existing data set, also for the ongoing data quality check. Monitoring and governing a company's data asset has also become more and more important in every type of companies. To this end, we observe change in the implementation of so-called data middle platform or middle data office or data as a service DAS. Going to the next slide. In relation to the trends we discussed earlier, we would like to highlight the data requirements that we observe in the China market. First and foremost, we will be risk stating the obvious here, but compliant with the regulatories while storing, processing data in credit modeling in China, to be frank, in any other country, has always been the #1 priority. There are a wide range of relevant regulatory requirements which include, but not limited to, personal privacy data protection, cybersecurity, data security, data export, to name a few. A robust credit modeling and monitoring will nowadays require the input of both traditional data like company financial and alternative data like payment transaction and all sentiment data. Data with higher frequency and lower latency are desirable, especially in the risk surveillance use cases. Big data and alternative data are inevitably noisy and unstructured, which makes the quality of the data utmost important. There has been some debates over whether or not big data need to be cleaned before analysis, but in any case, having the quality traceable data is one way to avoid the garbage in and garbage out situations. In order to navigate the large number of data sets and generate useful insight, data science and analytical tools that normally involve machine learning, AI, are required. As an example, a set of machine learning-based natural language processing, or NLP, algorithms are required to process and analyze text documents to extract sentiment information embedded in the documents. In the case of analyzing company announcements in the Chinese stock market, just to give you examples, the tool become a necessity when there are thousands of announcements every day, with some reports could be as long as 150 pages. Now back to Michelle to talk about the data versus content requirements. Michelle.
Thank you, Jian. If you get the same content from different sources, one question we get asked by a lot of market participants is, does it matter where we get the data from and how it's stored and delivered? We'll use analogy in house building. The exterior of the house and the furnishings is the content. It provides a view of the world, and researchers and developers can synthesize this content via charting and analytics and research and insights to gain a view from the world using this data? Well, this is the visible layer and what the end user sees. But beneath the surface, acting very much like the foundation of a building, where the building structure itself could evolve in the future, a number of important considerations in designing databases and delivering data. Some areas under consideration are reliability, coverage, latency, availability, security, reliably and accurately archiving the data with the appropriate timestamps, which matches the point the decision made and the information is made public. How informative is this data and the content? Is it noisy? And how much do you need to spend time treating it? And finally, organization. And does it require a lot of resources to retrieve this data? All the above can impact the value of data assets. In recent days, we see an interest in stress testing and scenario analysis. One commonly used approach is to simulate the impact of previous stress events and look at credit ratings to assess portfolio level resilience to shocks. If credit ratings are measures of resilience against shocks, then the building blocks of these ratings can help us fine-tune the types of shocks these entities are resilient to. So we create a database called Scores and Factors to really break down these ratings into the building blocks. The advantage of using these scores is that it's a metric that's already normalized to be apples-to-apples comparisons across geographies and industries. So we'll show some examples here using the energy industry. On the left-hand side, you see the cash flow and leverage scores of rated energy entities across the globe. Now you can see that, in fact, it's quite skewed, with a number of entities scoring at aggressive and highly leveraged, which are the worst two scores. On the right, you can see that liquidity is slightly more benign, with most of them inadequate. But these could indicate exactly why there's a lot of defaults happening in the energy sector in the last couple of months. As a risk manager, you can run a negative screen to weed out entities with the weakest cash flow and leverage scores. Applying a similar approach to banks, we can use the BICRA or Banking Industry Country Risk Assessment scores, and then look at countries' levels of systemic risk. This can tell you how well a country can actually weather borrower defaults as they start to strain the system, which is what we're seeing now. In this chart, we asset-weighted these bank-specific scores and aggregated them up to the country level, so that if the bigger banks had poor liquidity, it would show up more prominently in the chart. For the most part, post 2008, 2009, you can see that most of these countries have pretty much handled their bank capital and earnings and have adequate funding, with a couple of exceptions in emerging markets. Finally, in an environment where industry participants need the government to bail them out, a government's fiscal assessment could inform us of the ability to provide fiscal stimulus without resorting to aggressive borrowing from governments, effectively carrying over the problem from corporates to governments with excessive leverage. So we look at both fiscal performance and flexibility, which looks at borrowing trends, assets and revenue base of governments, as well as down the rows, the debt to burden, which measures debt to GDP, interest cost versus government revenue, and access to funding. Now in this chart, we have a heat map. So each one of these cells represents the number of sovereign governments falling in between these two buckets. You can see that whilst the majority of these countries are in the top left corner with stronger fiscal scores, there are 5 countries with the worst fiscal position scores in the lowest right. As Jian has mentioned earlier in the presentation, the last few years has also seen an increased adoption in the use of unstructured data, such as sentiment indices on text and indicators using global maps, etc. Now, what drives the value of these machine-readable credit ratings research and text? And we design the data in a way that it is stored and to help end users more easily develop algorithms around it. Whilst news articles and Google search buzz posts can be filled with noise, are prone to herding effects, and have statistically been proven their short shelf lives in the market, transcripts and credit research both proved to have a wealth of information that could have potentially have longer persistence. This chart here indicates the number of times COVID-19 or similar texts are mentioned in earnings calls globally from January to June 2020. You can see that for transcripts, it is picking up in March 2020 and continue to be mentioned as earnings drivers during subsequent earnings reports conference calls. This tells you that companies do see COVID-19 theme impacting forward-looking earnings from the time to come. A similar persistence in the reporting of COVID-19 is seen in credit research reports by S&P Global Ratings, which also distills investor feedback, are generally less noisy than news and media reports. Our reporting ramped up substantially in March 2020 ahead of the peak in transcripts in May. And more importantly, the text content in credit ratings research is designed to be concise and precise in its delivery, which also increases the informativeness of the text content by word count. Can we organize these valuable text-based content sets so that it is easier for machine-based algorithms to find the required information? Well, we can take advantage of a couple of features within S&P Global Ratings research to form our database. The first thing we see is that the articles are presented in a structured format. So here's an example of a ratings research article, and you can see that the sections are clearly marked. The entities and authors are also clearly identified, which allows you to actually adjust for the author's inherent optimism bias and the changes in how they feel about the entity. We also tag the sections and also indicate you can cross-reference your industries and geographies so that you can run better text analysis around peer comparisons and run industry and country level aggregations on these sentiment indices. Finally, you can also isolate the sections that you want. So maybe business description may not give you a lot of forward-looking information on credit risk of Macy's, but perhaps downside and upside scenario sections could be more informative. Your algo can actually skip to just the sections they need, and therefore you can discard those which don't inform credit quality. Thank you for attending today's presentation. Now we'll turn over to Q&A.